Welcome back to Lamp Dog and part 2 of our deep dive with legendary gaffer Jim Plannette. In the first part, we explored his roots, his father's influence, breaking into the industry, and those first pivotal moments that shaped his career. Now we're stepping into the golden years, Braveheart, Legends of the Fall. We also get into how the craft has evolved and what Jim sees for the future. Let's jump in. What's been your favorite tool over the years? Like if you had to pick one, what light would you choose?
I don't think I have a favorite, actually. I've used so many different kinds of lights, from arcs to LEDs, and there's a little light now that Aperture makes that's about this big, that, of course, runs on a battery, and you can put it anywhere.
Yeah.
It's ingenious. And actually, my father worked with a DP named Lucien Ballard, and he was married to an actress named Merle Oberon.
Yeah.
And she had some kind of scars on her chin. And so he invented the Obi light, Merle Oberon,
Right.
which was 2,000-watt lights right above the lens that washed out these scars. And ingenious,
Yeah.
But that's why I think fill light should come from the camera, because then if it makes a shadow, you don't see it.
Exactly.
I was doing a movie with a cameraman, and I put the fill light right by the camera. He said, "No, it needs to be way over there." I said, "Well, then we're going to have two shadows." He said, "It needs to be over there." I said, "Okay." So the next morning we're coming out of looking at the dailies, and he said, "What'd you think?" I said, "No, it looked good." I said, "But the double shadow still bothered me." In the old days we had 6. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, from a lot of people's point of view, like a 20K Fresnel obviously is still a perfect tool, but what we're seeing now with technology, and even with the invention of the KinoFlow, was a bit of flexibility in color and a bit of flexibility in space and energy draw and a lot of those things. And now with LED technology, we've got an infinite rainbow of colors and choices, and manufacturers now are starting to get closer to those form factors that we like. It's a lot of work of love by a lot of manufacturers to try and recreate the quality of the light with all the new features that everybody's demanding. So I really applaud a lot of those manufacturers now, because what we're seeing is people listening to gaffers and DPs and people that make movies, and they're now responding in a way that's really beautiful. But the little small pucks in a car, those things are amazing. You don't have to try and put a stick up in there anymore.
But to kind of go back, I got a call from John Toll, who I'd known since 1975. This was in 1993. And he said he was doing a movie in Canada, and would I want to do it if he offered me the job? He said, "I'm not offering you the job, but if I did, would you say yes?" And I said, "Yes, John, I would." He said, "Okay, I'll call you back." So it turns out he'd hired another gaffer that he got nervous about because he didn't have as much experience as I. And this was going to be a complicated movie, and so then he called me back. He said, "You want to do this?" "Yes." And it was Legends of the Fall. And so it's interesting. When they hired him, he said, "How much prep do I have?" And they said 4 weeks. And he said, "How much prep does the production designer have?" Well, they said 8 weeks.
Right.
He said, "I'll come up 8 weeks ahead if you just pay per diem for the first 4 weeks, but I want to be there when you choose these locations and build these sets." And they said, "Okay." And that's so important.
Yeah.
If they pick these things, or like they built a big farmhouse and a barn and everything, which way does it face? North, south, east, or west?
Yeah.
And so he was there, and the walls inside were going to be white, and he said, "No, they need to be darker." And so they made them darker. Again, a collaboration so that you can light and photograph the sets that are built and used. And no movie's going to look good if the director doesn't care how the movie looks. And Ed Zwick cared about the way that looked. So in the morning, we shot facing east. In the afternoon, we shot facing west. And in the middle of the day, we were inside.
Right.
And so John arranged an ASC screening of this movie before it opened. And I was sitting next to him, and right behind us was Haskell Wexler. And when the lights came up at the end of the movie, Haskell said, "John, amazing, a whole movie in backlight."
Right.
And because everybody cared about the way it looked. And, of course, he won the Academy Award for that movie. Yeah. So pretty amazing.
Pretty amazing. How many Academy Award-winning films have you been part of for cinematography?
I'm not sure, actually. I know Legends of the Fall and Braveheart won Academy Awards. That might be the only two.
Okay. Probably a lot of them nominated, I'm sure.
It's funny. I was doing a commercial, and in the 80s, and the producer said, "We're doing another commercial next week, and we're going to have Jordan Cronenweth as the DP." I said, "Oh, that's wonderful, And so they told him that I had highly recommended him, and so he said, "Well, he should be the gaffer then." So I got to be the gaffer with Jordan Cronenweth. And the first day of our shoot was a car commercial. And I said, "They're going to announce the Academy Award nominations today. Let me check and see whether you got nominated for Blade Runner."
Right.
So I called, and he didn't get a nomination for Blade Runner. So I was coming back to tell him, and one of his assistants ran up to me and he said, his wife just called and said, "Don't tell him." So I said, "Well, he's not a child." So I went up. He was lying on the floor because we were shooting on a hi-hat. And what'd you find out? I said, "Well, somehow you didn't get nominated." He said, "Okay,
Right.
And so he wasn't nominated. He won the BAFTA award for Blade Runner, and a British DP won the American Oscar for Gandhi.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense.
Amazing.
Because Blade Runner is one of the best-looking movies that I've ever seen, ever.
It stands up
Yeah.
to the test of time without fail. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous film. And some of the most creative lighting work that I've seen. Some of the things they did in that film, I still can't quite figure out how they accomplished. But
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your relationship with key grips. Like, you've worked with some of the best, and some of those people are still working.
Sure.
Yeah.
Again, it's a collaboration.
Yeah.
I listen to what they have to say, and they listen to what I have to say, and it works out pretty well.
Yeah.
And I don't want to work with a key grip that is not a collaborator, that's going to tell me what he's going to put in front of the light. No, I'm telling you what to put in front of the light. And there's so many different options that I only bring opal, quarter grid, light grid, full grid, and muslin.
Right.
And but there's 20 other choices. Well, forget it. Let's just keep it to a minimum,
Yeah.
Again, it's great to work with somebody that collaborates.
Yeah. You've worked with Al Laverty quite a bit. I mean, Al's.
Oh, no, absolutely.
I would love to have Al on this, in this room as well, talking about a lot of the films you guys have done together, because his career has been as magnificent in a lot of ways as yours has, and with different people in different films. But, that's a gift to get an opportunity to work with someone like Al, because your life gets so much easier.
No, for sure.
Oh my God, it's just, it's
he's a pleasure.
Your relaxation level immediately.
That's right.
Just, you calm down. So, and then what about your relationship with DPs? How many DPs did you do multiple films with, you think?
None. No, I'm kidding. Again, as I said, I like to start the lighting while they're setting up the shot, or ahead of time, and then we can make changes if they see something they want changed. But then it's pretty simple. Instead of starting the lighting when they finish setting up the shot, because that takes much longer. So I just like DPs that are collaborators that want input. So there's quite a few that I've done multiple movies with, and then they want to take control. So then they start hiring some. That the way the MO is, when you're a new DP, you hire an experienced gaffer, And when you're an old DP, you hire a young gaffer that you could just tell what to do, which Conrad Hall did that. He hired Harry Sunby when he first moved up to DP for the first 3 or 4 movies, and then he started hiring young guys.
Right.
Well, that's fine, you know. But no, I have a lot of people I enjoy working with, so that's good.
And you've worked with Paul Thomas Anderson, who's
Once.
one time, yeah, an amazing film,
Yes, Magnolia.
right? And Bob shot that, right?
That's right.
Right. So that's an interesting process with Paul because Paul's all involved in the camera, you know, and the lensing. And so really working with the DP on that film, I imagine, was more about lighting than it was about camera for Bob.
Actually, it's interesting. I noticed on that movie that Robert Elswit contributed more to that movie than Paul realized. And Paul thought he was doing everything himself.
Right.
And he's not. He's not a collaborator, but he needs skilled people. When I did Magnolia, and then Robert and I were doing Heist in Canada, and I got this phone call from Paul Thomas Anderson. And he said, Jim, he said, I understand you're not going to do my next movie. So I said, well, I'd agreed to work with Steven Soderbergh on Ocean's 11. I said, I think he needs me more than you and Robert do. And he went, oh, but if I shoot my own movie, you'll be my gaffer, won't you? I said, oh, of course.
Right.
And now he is his own DP.
Yeah.
And he's using Mike Bauman, who, of course, is a wonderful gaffer.
Bringing back the lighting cameraman.
The first movie they did called Single Thread or something, I went to see it at
Phantom Thread.
Phantom Thread. Went to see it at a special screening, and the credits come up, and it says lighting cameraman Michael Bauman, operating cameraman, and no director of photography credit on the movie,
Right.
Which I thought was wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's a great looking movie too.
Yeah. Yeah, really. I think Mike's pretty good.
Oh, absolutely.
He can handle it. That experience with that team is an interesting one. I had the fortunate opportunity to work on There Will Be Blood with Robbie Baumgartner as the gaffer. And I think that was the last film that Bob and Paul did together, for which Robert Elswit won an Academy Award for, which was really great. But that's an interesting experience with an interesting dynamic with a director similar to Steven Soderbergh, who's so visually invested that the DP has a different role, and it also then changes the relationship with the gaffer a little bit, because there's more communication with the director about visuals than you would normally be used to. I think that Wim Wenders is very similar in that regard, that he's very invested in the visual portion of it. He's not necessarily the strongest in lighting. Any other teams that you worked with in that regard, where your relationship with the director concerning lighting or visual was stronger than you would have expected it to be? Because that's an interesting dynamic in my head.
Actually, Steven Spielberg is pretty interested in the look of the movie as well. And then they're all interested, but I deal more with the DP than with the director.
Right.
And again, collaborating, not just taking orders, which is the fun part, you know.
Yeah. Obviously, you know, the relationship with a lot of those DPs is really strong, and then sometimes they don't work out, or you grow apart. I have a real soft spot in my heart for The Road. We were just chatting about it a few minutes ago, because I met my wife shortly after that in Pittsburgh. But that film, to me, is a masterpiece that nobody saw. You know, I think maybe it's the subject material, maybe it's just Cormac McCarthy's too hard for people to digest. But I think that film is brilliant, and the work that you guys did on that is stunning. It's so I can't say enough good things. What was that experience like? Because that was, 2008, 2007 or 8? Yeah,
I think so. So the DP on that was Javier Aguirre from Spain, older DP who knew what he was doing. He used to say, "The sun is our enemy." and because it's supposed to be post-apocalyptic.
Right.
So that made it really hard for the grip, to block out the sun or at least make it soft. But again, we tried to do the lighting invisibly because it should look like a documentary. But he was surprisingly more of a collaborator than I expected. And so we all kind of worked together to get this thing done properly.
Right.
We shot mostly, of course, in Pittsburgh, and then we went to New Orleans, and then we went to Portland. But it was a challenge to keep it looking post-apocalyptic.
Right.
But even though it was a challenge, it was a lot of fun.
Right. What kind of tools were you using on that? Because obviously most of the light is soft, even on some of the interiors.
We had actually, he told me about some fluorescent lights that he used in Europe that were dimmable. I'd never heard of that.
Right.
So I said, well, let's get some. So we ordered them. They sent it to us from Europe, and we used those quite a bit. And sometimes for fire effect, we used a fire pole, and we put one of these fluorescent lights warm through the fire. So the fire did the flicker, and the light did the amount of light. So it worked out really well.
That's cool. If you had to pick a favorite besides Young Frankenstein, what's the film that you look at that you've done that gives you sort of the greatest pleasure, as both as the gaffer and as a viewer?
When people ask me my favorite film to have worked on, my answer is The Fisher King, directed by Terry Gilliam, with a British DP named Roger Pratt. It's funny, after Steven Poster and I did Someone to Watch Over Me with Ridley Scott, I said to Steven, your next movie is really important because Ridley's going to get all the credit for the look of this movie, and we both know you contributed a lot to that.
Right.
So make sure the next one's visually interesting. So then he called me and he said, I'm going in for an interview. I said, oh, good. What? He said, Big Top Pee-wee. I said, Steven, remember what we talked about? So we did Big Top Pee-wee.
Right.
And one of the producers of Big Top Pee-wee recommended me to Roger Pratt, who was the DP on The Fisher King. So if I hadn't done Big Top Pee-wee, I wouldn't have done The Fisher King. And so I went in to meet Roger Pratt because he'd done a wonderful movie with Ridley Scott, and I wanted to talk about it. And I didn't think he'd hire me because, British DPs are lighting cameramen. And so we're having an interview and talking, and he said, are you one of those Hollywood gaffers who wants to set all the lights? I said, no, but I want to be involved in the setting of all the lights. He said, that's what I'm looking for. So he offered me the job. He said, I got a DP for New York, and you can do the LA part. I don't know what I was thinking, but I said, I'm not interested in doing half a movie. Oh. So I did the New York part as well. And while we were scouting, we went to Grand Central Station in New York. And as we were walking in, Terry Gilliam said, wouldn't it be great if when they got to the main floor, everyone started waltzing around the information booth? And the two producers, I thought their jaws were going to hit the floor because that's not in the script. But that's what we did.
Right.
But of course, it's supposed to be 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but we were shooting at midnight. So I was prepping in New York for 4 weeks, and whenever I had a moment, I would go to Grand Central Station and try to think about lighting it at night to make it look like day. And so there was a light at the time called a Musco light, which was originally designed to light athletic fields for night games where they didn't have lights. So it had a 110-foot boom arm with 15 6K HMIs that were controllable from the ground. And so I told Roger Pratt, I said, we'll put the Musco light on the south side when they come in, and then we'll move it around to the west side when we get to the main floor. And he said, how long will it take to move it? I said, 10 minutes, because it's totally self-contained.
Right.
And we did it, actually. And and then inside I had lights hidden everywhere I could behind pillars and things. I had tungsten lights inside and the Musco light outside, but I put a half CTO on the 6K HMIs, and so the color balance was better, and it actually worked so well, and the whole experience was wonderful with Terry Gilliam and Roger Pratt.
Right.
And I stayed in touch with Roger. Unfortunately, we lost him just a short time ago, but he was a wonderful guy to work with.
Yeah, it's amazing. And that film too, it if you watch it today, it could have been released yesterday.
But, Jeff Bridges and Robin Williams.
But also, a great band of character actors that went along. Michael Jeter and Mercedes Ruehl and these supporting actors that were...
Amanda Plummer,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. It's, again, it's another one of those masterpieces that wasn't Terry Gilliam's most well-known film, but I think...
For sure.
Might be his masterpiece.
It's interesting, Jeff Bridges, I noticed right away, he was taking still photographs with a wide lux camera. And he made sure to have every member of the crew in at least one of his photographs. And then he put together a book to give to everybody at the end of the movie with these wide lux photographs in it. So I have I look at it and it brings back all these wonderful memories.
Yeah.
And then what he did is he made a hardcover book based on a number of the movies that he'd done. He sold that book and all the profits went to charity.
Wow.
So an amazing guy. And of course, Robin Williams was such a pleasure to work with. We moved from New York to Los Angeles. And when we were in Los Angeles, there were 5 days when Robin wasn't going to work. So we went home to San Francisco. After a couple of days, he thought maybe we missed him, which we did.
Right.
And so he called on the phone and asked to be put on the speaker, and he entertained us for about 10 minutes. It was just what we needed,
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
I was fortunate to do a movie with Jonathan Winters in San Francisco when Jonathan was still alive. And Robin Williams would show up about once a week, and everything stopped.
There you go.
And nobody cared.
Right,
The two of them together were fantastic. It was, and everybody would look forward to when is Robin coming,
Of course.
because he and Jonathan Winters together were barbaric.
Right.
It would ruin a day, and like I said, nobody cared. So that's a really fortunate, and really that film pushed him to places that I'm not sure that he was comfortable with, because it was a really powerful film. So, but those roles in that film, again, can't say enough good things about. So that's a pretty good one to have as a favorite. I mean,
Right.
It's hard to pick your favorite child, but that one's a pretty good one.
But as I was saying, right after Legends of the Fall, I did Braveheart with John Toll. That's actually the longest shooting movie we shot for 108 days. We were 6 weeks in Scotland and 16 weeks in Ireland. And when we were in Scotland in June and July, half of July, it rained almost every day. We had 3 days we were shooting a wedding sequence outside, and it didn't rain, miraculously.
Right.
And then we got to Ireland, and we did some really big, fight scenes, war scenes. And the reason they went to Ireland was Ireland allowed them to use 750 Irish reservists as the army for either Britain or Scotland.
Wow.
It was really quite a movie. And Mel Gibson was a pleasure to work with. When he noticed tension on the set, he'd make some kind of a joke to kind of lighten things up.
Right.
And, being the actor and the director is really quite a challenge, and he did really well.
So what are you working on now? What are the projects you're choosing? Because you now have the fortunate option of picking and choosing even more than you did as a full-time gaffer.
The ability to pick and choose is so important. It's so wonderful. It's something I didn't have,
Right.
But I do now. Not too long ago, I worked on another movie with Steven Soderbergh called Kimmy, and Phil Messina was the production designer, and Phil said, I think the reason Steven hired us is because he couldn't be here for the prep, because he was producing the Oscars at the same time. And so something I had never done before. We shot on stage in Santa Clarita for 25 of the 30 days that we were shooting. And we had LED screens out the window. And so at the place that was providing the screens, we shot a bunch of tests. And then we moved to the stage. And I was going to have scissor lifts with lights on them go above the screen to go through the windows. But they hadn't mentioned that there's going to be a truss on top of the screens, which pretty much limited how. So I attached actually airy sky panels. There was one window that was about 14 feet wide. I had 4 sky panels. Another one that was 7 feet wide. I had 2 sky panels. And the ability to change the intensity and the color remotely is fabulous.
Yeah.
And so in the daytime, I had 5,600 Kelvin at 100%. At night, I had 3,200 Kelvin at 20%. And then I had a street light look up from below shooting up. And again, you can't tell that we're not in Seattle.
Yeah.
And she could react to her boyfriend across the street. We could see him in his window, and there was a guy spying on her. We could see him in his window, and cars going by, and it just. I saw it on the big screen at Warner Brothers at a screening, and after it was over, I said to Steven, I said, "How long were we in Seattle? 6 weeks? Because that's the way it looks."
Yeah.
The challenge of doing it now with shooting HD is just wonderful. It makes it so much easier, and I didn't need as big a crew, and our average day on that movie was 7.5 hours.
Amazing.
Quite often, Steven would say, "Okay, get something to eat, go home, that's a wrap." At 6 hours, things have changed a lot. That's not like Cannery Row.
Right. But it also means that a filmmaker who has already got the story cut in their head knows what those shots are, and they're putting those shots together, and when they're done, they're done. When you've got what you need, you've got what you need, and there's no security needed.
Right. So Steven was the director, the DP, and the editor on that movie. And so we only shot what was going to be in the movie.
Yeah.
And he'd watch the dailies and start cutting together at night. And then he'd come in the next morning and he'd say, I need one more shot, from yesterday, but it worked out so well.
Yeah. It's like doing an entire film of reshoots where you know every shot that you need to fill those gaps.
I remember reading a memoir of John Huston, and he would say, I don't need to go to the editing room at the end of the movie because I never shoot anything that's not going to be in the movie. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
100 years ago, I was working on Columbo at Universal, and every Friday we would come in at noon because of turnaround and work until Saturday at noon and get double time on Saturday once we passed midnight. And so then I was told the next week that the director was going to be the editor. And I thought, oh, great. We won't shoot so many different angles. It was worse. He wanted more options.
Right.
Probably wasn't as confident as he should have been,
It's so hard. That's that journeyman process again. The directors who have done it and made those mistakes and failed and been screamed at by some executive producer for going over too many days.
I did a movie called Gigli, and the director would do 60 or 70 takes on stage.
Right.
And when we were shooting exterior, sometimes after take 12, I'd go to him and I'd say, I think you got it. He said, do you think so? I said, I really do. He said, okay, I'll do one more and we'll move on. And we would.
Wow.
And so one day we're shooting at the beach and my wife came to visit and I introduced her to him. And he said, your husband is my rabbi. He saves me from myself. I said, well, I'm not always successful. He said, you're more successful than anyone has ever been. I call it the director's disease, OCD, right. Obsessive compulsive disorder, seeking perfection when there is no such thing. And take 60, oh, that was really good, but 61 might be perfect. Let's do one more.
Yeah.
No.
Well, there's that old theory that in art there is no perfection.
Right.
The painter knows when to stop. And that's the only time it's perfect is when you put the brush down. That's when it's perfect. Where do you see this industry going? You've seen a lot of changes over the years.
Well, it's interesting. I see still pictures of lighting setups lately that I think, what are they doing? You know, are they just trying to make their job more complicated to make it more money or something? It's much simpler than it used to be, and yet some people make it more complicated. I did a movie called Forelock, which hasn't been released yet, and when the cameraman called me, he said, the director wants to shoot on film. I said, why? It's a $3 million budget, and I said, you'll never do it for $3 million on film. Anyway, we ended up shooting on the Sony Venice at 3200 mostly. But it was really great fun to do, and you know that the DP was a collaborator, and so we had a great time.
That's good. It's funny that you're talking people out of shooting on film. It's now anytime somebody says they want to shoot on film, I get excited because I get to dust the meter off and finally go back to the days when there were 3 people on set that knew what was happening inside the black box. Instead of now where everybody's got an opinion about what the image should be.
It's interesting. I got a call from a director that I'd worked with, and he said he was doing a movie, and he said the DP wants to shoot on film, and he said, what do you think about that? So I told him, I said, I don't understand why anybody shoots on film. I said, you can make HD look any way you want, and it's much easier to work with. And he said, I called John Toll and asked him the same question. And his answer was the same as yours.
Really?
And again, I don't understand. If you can make with a DI, and even if you shoot on film, they don't print the negative. They transfer it to digital.
Exactly.
So
you end up in the same place.
That's right.
Yeah. But a lot of people say that gaffers are just wannabe DPs. Did you ever have that urge? I mean, I'm sure you've shot quite a bit in your day, but
a little bit. But I used to think that if I were a DP, I could do Halloween 6, but as a gaffer, I could do Braveheart.
Right.
I'd much rather do that. And I know some gaffers who become DPs, and some of them quite successfully. But one of the things is they have to be able to say, I'm not a gaffer anymore, I'm a DP.
Yeah.
And financially, I've never been able to do that because I had a wife and kids to support.
Sure.
So I'm sure my father would have been a good DP, but I've never had that opportunity to move up on something that I could do.
Yeah, I always feel like the drive has got to be so strong to want to put away a perfectly good career.
That's right.
And start fresh again with something else.
That's right.
That you really have to have a drive to do it. And
right.
I've sort of never had that.
I guess I haven't either.
Yeah. But I really enjoy being a gaffer. For me, it's, there's frustrating times and there's things that I wish I could change. But when I think about what I do, it makes me happy.
No, as I told you, I really, it's still fun, so I still do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can just keep doing it.
I'm only 84 years old. Come on.
84. That's, again, like I wouldn't have guessed 84. I would have guessed late 60s, maybe.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. But I know how long you've been doing this. So it's, right. The math doesn't add up. Your father was a very successful gaffer, had a very long, full career. And then as you slid into that, your father had essentially retired.
We overlapped about 3 or 4 years, and I worked with him on a couple of things. I was working on a job with him running an arc, and I was up on the green bed, and he said, if it flickers, no dinner. I took him to see a movie called The Cheap Detective that I had done with John Alonzo. And after the movie was over, he said, wow, that John knows a lot about lighting. I said, wait a minute. You did the lighting, but now with me, it's John's doing the lighting? I said, I did that lighting. He said, oh, okay.
So your dad got to see quite a few of the films that you did.
A few, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, that had to be for him, I would imagine, pretty gratifying that you were able to take your own path and do very well. That had to be
Right.
Yeah.
No, it was great. Yeah, my dad and I had a good relationship. It was really good. When I was 10 years old, I had a job pulling a wagon selling Sunday newspapers on Sunday morning. And at that time, people in town were working 6-day weeks. So the only day my father had off was Sunday. But he said, come on, we'll go in the car and you can cover more territory and sell more papers. And so it was really great. And so I had these places I would deliver these papers and they would leave the money under their mat. And then I had to start yelling, get your Sunday morning paper to let people know I was there. Well, he started yelling a little bit early. He had a booming voice. I said, it's a little early, isn't it, Dad? He said, if they're not up, they ought to be. And then he'd yell, he killed her because he loved her. I said, I'm sorry. Somewhere in the paper it says that. Don't worry.
Right.
So, no, my dad and I, it was really great fun.
There's a lot of gaffers in history and current ones whose kids haven't picked up the mantle for any number of reasons. And your father, apparently attempted to discourage you from it.
That's right.
So I really like it when, this part of the world works, because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But
I remember my father told me that he was doing a movie at 20th Century Fox. And this guy came up to him and he said, I've been rigging for 17 years, but I want to be a gaffer. Can you help me? My dad said, sure. And he got him on his crew. That was Earl Gilbert. And so he became my father's best boy. He was the best boy on The Greatest Story Ever Told, which is an amazing movie.
it's a big film, too.
They started in Page, Arizona. My father was telling me this story that there wasn't enough accommodations for the crew, so they built prefab houses for the crew. He said there were 4 members of the crew to each house. They built 100 prefab houses. I said, you mean the crew was 400? And he said, yeah, but that didn't include the drivers. They were able to stay in town. There were 180 drivers. And so when I was getting in the union, I had to get my union application signed by 2 members of the union. So I called Earl Gilbert and I said, can you sign my union application? He said, of course, Jim. He said, I'm shooting on The Graduate at the Ambassador Hotel. Come there and I'll sign your papers. So I went there and he signed my papers. I got the union. Now, in about 2010 or 11, I was in Arizona because my wife's family is there. And it made me think of The Greatest Story Ever Told. And The Graduate was screening on television that night. So I thought about Earl. So I called Earl Gilbert. I hadn't talked to him in 20 years. I said, hi, it's Jim Plannette. He said, oh, hi, Jim. He said, I signed your union papers at the Ambassador Hotel. I said, how can you remember that? So, and I saw him just before he turned 95. And I went to visit him, and I was planning on telling him a lot of stories. And he told me so many stories, I didn't get one of my stories told.
Oh, that's perfect.
But he was just a wonderful guy and an amazing gaffer who, of course, did Chinatown.
Yeah, no, it's
Did so many wonderful movies.
How many gaffers, and this is sort of a loaded question, but how many gaffers would you say that you seeded careers for in over your career? I mean, the tree that grows off the roots that you planted they're pretty deep. How many gaffers would you say that you seeded in Hollywood or across the country?
Quite a few, actually, which makes me really happy. Eric Segot and Russell Ayer, Ray Gonzalez.
Yeah, obviously the DeCellis family means a lot to you guys too, so that's great.
Yeah, of course, Michael DeCellis, Joe Capshaw, they both worked with me on Tom Horn for the first time. And I worked with Joe quite a bit, and then he became a gaffer and was a gaffer on ER for 10 years or something, I saw Joe not too long ago.
Again, because we're a journeyman system, the young gaffers that are coming up are still working on set while they're trying to make those transitions. And what I love about being here is that you get to work with some of the best of the best.
Sure, sure.
You know, it's a really fortunate system that one day you show up and you're working with, you know, some of the people that you consider your heroes. And I think that that for me is a really fortunate position to be in this industry, that you get direct access to a lot of the people that you hold in high regard. So, you know, and in that note, thank you. This, you know, as far as this industry goes, as far as I'm concerned, the king of kings on this one, it's you've proven to be kind and compassionate and good at your job.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
And that wraps up an incredible two-part conversation with Jim Plannette. From black and white classics to the digital revolution, Jim has seen it all, and his work has set the standard for generations of gaffers to come. If you've enjoyed this conversation, hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the artistry behind the scenes of cinema.